Thank you, Jonathan, for that comprehensive presentation. And thank you to those of you who have both put questions through as part of the registration process and those who have just put it in the chat function, and that option is still available to you. And we're going to try and work our way through as many of those questions as possible. And I suppose we're going to start with the old at-risk and not at-risk question. So, Jonathan, maybe if you could explain the small business exemption, and do you need any paperwork for goods not at risk if you are eligible?
Hi, Peter. Okay, so small business exemption, I'm assuming that they are talking about the low value parcel easement in this question, which is an easement for goods of £135 value or less, and that is the total value of the consignment. And in those circumstances, there's simplifications for customs and removes the need for full import duty VAT processes. However, in terms of companies moving goods regularly and goods in excess of that value, I would recommend that if those goods are not at risk, that they would go down the UKIMS route, as in registering for UKIMS to be able to declare those goods as not at risk. I know that there's a number of questions came in prior to today around fast parcel movements, and I know I've seen pop up in my side eye during the presentation a number of questions about fast parcel operator movements, so maybe we can look at that later. But I think we're really talking about that easement for total value parcels. You have to be certain that the total value of all items is not if all the goods within it are less than £135 in value individually. The total value of the consignment must be less than £135 in value to avail of the low value parcel easement.
Thank you. Are there any implications for purchasing goods in GB for sale in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, or also purchasing goods in the Republic of Ireland for sale in Great Britain?
Yeah, okay, so essentially there's two questions within that, Peter. So in terms of movement of goods from GB to NI that are going to be sold in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, those goods are at risk, and therefore they must move under the red lane arrangements with declarations completed either via TSS or externally through another third-party software, custom software provider. In terms of the associated tariffs, you can look and see if those goods meet preferential origin requirements, if they can move on to return goods relief, if they were previously in free circulation in the European Union prior to movement to GB and onward to NI. And if they don't, then you can decide if you want to go down the route of waiving using your de minimis waiver, which is a 300,000 allowance over a rolling 36-month period, €300,000 allowance, where you have a requirement to report on this every 90 days, and you set this up through your government gateway account. Or indeed, if you want to try and use the duty reimbursement scheme to claim back with evidence of the percentage of goods that have remained within the United Kingdom, but the goods are at risk. The second part relates, I believe, to qualifying Northern Ireland goods. So what we're talking about here is that under the Northern Ireland Protocol and within the negotiations for the Northern Ireland Protocol, the UK government insisted in this element of Northern Ireland goods that have been manufactured, commercially processed in Northern Ireland with materials that were in free circulation at the time of manufacture processing, or for goods that are in Northern Ireland, in free circulation in the Northern Ireland at the point of sale, i.e. they are not under a customs procedure, they're not moved in under transit, they're not in a warehouse or whatever, that those goods are considered as qualifying Northern Ireland goods and therefore can be sold into the United Kingdom, Great Britain, without any additional checks or requirements. So buying goods from Ireland or elsewhere in the EU, bringing them into Northern Ireland, and then your customer base in both the EU, Northern Ireland, or in the EU and the UK, if those goods are physically in free circulation in Northern Ireland at the point of sale, they can be sold into the Great Britain market without any customs requirements or tariff requirements, and they can of course be sold back into the EU as well.
Okay, I think this next question you probably answered during the presentation, but just maybe if you could briefly summarise this. It's a company that's producing pet food in Great Britain and bringing it into Northern Ireland, which is then sold both here and in the Republic of Northern Ireland. So what are their responsibilities?
Yeah. Okay, so if this company was saying that they were only moving this pet food into Northern Ireland for sale within the internal United Kingdom market, it could move under UKIMS and the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme. But because it has been brought in, it has been produced outside Northern Ireland, it's been produced in Great Britain, it's coming into Northern Ireland, and it has been sold in both the Northern Ireland internal market and the EU market. It tracks both customs and sanitary phytosanitary controls. And in summary, the importer record must manage both customs and SPS obligations such as export health certificates, traces, border control post checks, traces NT, which is pre-notification requirements, because pet food is considered as a product of animal origin. If it was only for sale within Northern Ireland, it could move under NIREMS, and it would need to be appropriately labelled, i.e. not for EU. And it would have to be genuinely intended for NI final consumption, and both the GB supplier and NI importer must be both registered under NIREMS. But because it's going to both the EU, or both UK, Northern Ireland, and the EU, it requires all of those requirements. It's at risk, and it has SPS and customs obligations. Peter, I just took a note of myself during the presentation as well. I referred earlier to another method of reclaiming overpayment of duty. I think I referred to a C220 form, and that was a mistake by myself. It's a C28 form, C285 form. I've made this mistake twice. C285 form, and that is a form for overpayment of both VAT and duty, or duty at the point of import, and you reclaim it back. But obviously we have, under the Windsor Framework arrangements, our own duty reimbursement scheme as well. So I just took a note to that. I thought I'd highlight it afterwards, because I appreciate that there's a lot covered in today's presentation.
Okay, and just when you were talking about NIREMS there, just for those of you that maybe are unfamiliar with the acronym, it's the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, just to be clear on that there. Okay, there's been a couple of questions come in around returns. So the first one here is, how do we handle customs paperwork for items returned to us from GB as part of our service to clients?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and it's one that we are seeking clarification from HMRC on at the moment. It's not one I can give a simple answer to. It depends on who the company is that's bringing the product in, for starters. If I remove this idea of UKIMS from this question, Peter, and just talk about it in terms of an import into Northern Ireland. So goods have gone from Northern Ireland to customers in Great Britain. And then for one reason or another, they have to come back into Northern Ireland. Now, we've got two scenarios then that we could break that down to. We've got C2B customers, consumer customers returning goods to Northern Ireland. And then we've got business to business, so where it's been sold to a business customer in Northern Ireland coming back. Now, in the consumer to business scenario, as we discussed in today's webinar, there's essentially been a waiver of all customs requirements for consumer to consumer business to consumer and consumer to business returns. And that's where if it's going through a parcel operator, it can move through the UK carrier scheme if the operator or the hauliers signed up to the UK carrier scheme, and that removes that obligation. If it is coming back business to business and it is going to a commercial processor, for example, who is over this 2 million threshold, and I see another question come up about that. So the 2 million threshold is specific. It's an additional eligibility criteria for commercial processors. They have to meet the standard UKIMS eligibility criteria, and then there is 2 additional pieces of eligibility criteria. 3 if we add in agricultural quotas in terms of meat and so forth. But in terms of commercial processors, we have, if you're a commercial processor not involved in any of the approved purposes, the exemptions for construction, health, charitable organisations, or animal feed that we spoke about during the presentation, there is an exemption for companies with a turnover less than 2 million. If they have a turnover less than 2 million and they only sell within the United Kingdom internal market, they can be eligible to self-certify as not at risk. If they have a turnover over 2 million and they don't fall into any of those approved exemptions, their goods are deemed as automatically at risk. And there is absolutely more work that needs to be done, and I know that there is being work done by trade associations, etc., and highlighting this 2 million threshold isn't ideal. But as we stand today, if it's B2B and you're a commercial processor and you're over that 2 million threshold, so you can't use UKIMS, you have the ability to remove any associated tariffs by declaring the goods as preferential under UK preferential origin if they meet those requirements. And you could use importer's knowledge, i.e., because you were the manufacturer, you don't need to get a statement or anything, you can just put it in under this U112. Or if the goods were previously in free circulation in the EU prior, well, the EU or NI, you could use return goods relief, and there's evidence requirements under return goods relief as well. But in terms of returns specifically and the use of UKIMS, as you know, Peter, we're seeking further clarity from HMRC and looking at the different scenarios, i.e. a wholesaler, retailer who is signed up under UKIMS should, in theory, be able to use their UKIMS authorization to take those returns back. A commercial processor who doesn't fit or meet the 2 million eligibility threshold or doesn't fall into one of those exemptions, the goods will be deemed as at risk, and therefore they may have to use preferential origin or return goods relief to bring those goods back in. It isn't one that I can give a simple answer to. Unfortunately, there's very little that you can give a simple answer to when it comes to the Windsor Framework arrangements.
Okay, and then goods that don't remain in Northern Ireland but go back to GB, they're not at risk. But how do you disclose that on the Trader Support Service spreadsheet, column T? Very specific question there about filling in the forms.
Yeah, okay. This is something that's come up a number of times, and you know, I've often highlighted in my LinkedIn posts and everything that there's often quick questions, but there's never quick answers. There is nothing that is automatically not at risk. And I'll try and address a couple of these questions in one because I'm conscious of the time. Irrespective if you are a service business and you're bringing in goods that are for internal use within your business, or if there are goods that you're bringing in that are coming here and then going back into Great Britain, either way, they're not automatically not at risk. You must, as I stated, meet and apply for the prerequisite of UKIMS, the UK Internal Market Scheme, and then you must define exactly within your application how you meet the controls and what measures you have in place, well, because you are bound by that. If you have a compliance review thereafter by HMRC, they will look at what you have outlined in your UKIMS application in terms of your evidence and your controls and everything else. Now, specifically when they talk about column T, this is, I believe, in relation to the assisted completion service that the Trader Support Service offers for companies who want to get TSS to complete their declarations. I believe they will allow you 5 declarations per month where they will complete the declarations on your behalf. And that column T asks the question, are the goods to remain in Northern Ireland? And that possibly needs a bit of tweaking by TSS. Obviously, I'm not involved with TSS. I don't have any ability to change or review their spreadsheets and their wording. But I think that when they talk about other goods to remain in Northern Ireland, this is about UKIMS and do the goods meet UKIMS criteria. So it's a drop down yes or no in that column, and essentially you're answering the question, in my opinion, are these goods moving as not at risk under UKIMS? And that's where they have to look at it. But don't assume that your goods are automatically not at risk. There is no goods that are automatically not at risk. You are self-certifying via the UK Internal Market Scheme that your goods are not at risk, and that's a requirement for you. This idea that low risk, it doesn't matter. There's not at risk and there's at risk. Your goods are either at risk or they're not. So there's no such thing as low risk. It is either at risk or not at risk, and you must meet the criteria to be able to declare them as not at risk.
And just a quick word, Jonathan, on maybe the period of time that companies should be keeping records for.
Yeah, there is a requirement to keep records for 5 years, the importer of record. My slides earlier had some links which hopefully will be able to be shared when we publish the slides at a later date, Peter. But if not, if you go into the UKIMS, if you look on Google or whatever for UKIMS, other search engines are acceptable as well. For evidence requirements, it lists the type of evidence you require. There's different evidence requirements for business to consumer and business to business. So business to business is where you do not have the power over the final destination of the goods. And this is very, very important. And there is evidence requirements, and I know questions were coming in and they have come in around this. And that can be where you request from your customers their UKIMS authorization, or you request them to provide you with a written statement that anything that you sell to them will be for internal UK consumption use by consumers in Northern Ireland or Great Britain. You can add to your invoices these goods have been sold for internal use within the United Kingdom only, or for these goods have been sold for end use by consumers within the internal United Kingdom only. But those evidence requirements that must be kept for 5 years.
Okay, thank you. I think we're just going to move away from the risk not at risk for a while now, and just next question is really around the qualifying Northern Ireland goods. So this is goods incoming from the Republic of Ireland that are sold into mainland GB and also back to ROI. There's not actually a question, but the circumstance of that and the implications of that.
Yeah, so this is our dual market access. So qualifying Northern Ireland goods are goods that have been commercially processed in Northern Ireland using materials, components that were in free circulation in Northern Ireland at the point of processing. And then it's kind of a catch-all. And I say that because at the time, Michael Gove, when he announced this back in December 2020, said that they would tighten this up. And it has been tightened up in terms of sanitary, phytosanitary products, products of animal origin, where the products qualifying Northern Ireland goods in that category must come from a registered processor or packaging plant or distribution point within Northern Ireland to be able to avail of qualified Northern Ireland goods status. But goods must be physically located in Northern Ireland at the point of sale. It can't be a case that if you have a customer in GB, they ask you to source a product, you then go and source that product in Ireland or elsewhere in the EU, and then you ship it to them via Northern Ireland. That product wasn't physically located in Northern Ireland at the point of sale. But if you hold stock in Northern Ireland that you purchased from your suppliers within the EU or within GB or within the rest of the world, those goods are deemed to be qualified Northern Ireland goods because they're physically located in Northern Ireland point of sale, and that is when you sell them into Great Britain. They benefit from unfettered access to the internal United Kingdom market.
And just to clarify, Jonathan, they don't necessarily have to be manufactured in Northern Ireland, but they've got to be physically present in Northern Ireland at the time of sale.
Physically present, not under any special customs procedure. So we talk about being in free circulation. Free circulation means that all associated duties and taxes have been paid. The goods are, they are not in a bonded warehouse. They're not moving under special customs procedures such as inward processing or under transit or anything like that.
Okay. Next, we're on to EORI numbers and UKIM. So how can a sole trader who is not VAT registered claim back the import duties on movements from Great Britain to Northern Ireland with no EORI number?
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, an EORI number is a prerequisite requirement. So for UKIMs, and if outside of UKIMs, you sole trader or limited company or partnership, you're considered as an economic operator. And if you're moving goods from GB to NI, you require an EORI, an economic operator registration identification number. Trading under the Windsor Framework arrangements, you need an XI EORI number. You apply for a GB one and then you get an XI one. The fact that you're not VAT registered doesn't come into it. You can have an EORI number without being VAT registered. You can be UKIMS authorized without being VAT registered. So it can then, once you have your EORI number, you can claim back using the duty reimbursement scheme and holding evidence to support your claim under the duty reimbursement scheme. A successful duty reimbursement scheme claim, HMRC have indicated, will be refunded, paid within 16 days, but you have to get to that successful claim element of it. So that is very important. But don't need to be VAT registered, but you do require an XI EORI, and you can do that through your government gateway, or you can apply, and it is a pretty straightforward process to get an EORI number.
Okay, question from a services-based business now, obviously, but related to goods. So why do I need EORI or UKIMS for receiving consumables for service-based business that does not sell these products but uses them?
Okay, as we've already said, there's nothing that is automatically not at risk. There is no goods that are automatically not at risk, and you are, and the UK government are not automatically checking to see if a business is a service business or a trade and goods business or in both, and they won't know automatically and they won't check. It would be fantastic if they did. So I look at it in terms of myself. I am a service business. I am UKIMS authorized. My business being UKIMS authorized means that if I purchase goods from Great Britain, such as TVs or computers, laptops, furniture, a vehicle, or anything like that I want to bring in for internal use within my business, I can do that through my UKIMS authorization as long as they don't fall into that category 1 criteria or whatever. And I can then bring them in using the simplified process for internal market movements and internal market movement information record, complete an internal market movement information record. and I have no tariffs attached to it. But you have to be UKIMS. It's a prerequisite that you're UKIMS authorised before you can do that.
Okay, thank you. We have a question now on ICS2, and I suppose the first thing is, could you maybe just say a few words on what IS2 is, and then just what are the implications of it for businesses, primarily carriers?
Yeah, so ICS2 is a change that has been come in for the requirements through safety and security declarations, which safety and security declarations, known as an ENS, is completed on goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So when goods move from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, there is two declarations that need to be completed. There is, by the haulier, the carrier, a safety and security declaration, because the UK left the EU safety and security zone when it left the EU. And then there is thereafter the import declaration, which is the responsibility of the importer of record. Now, under TSS, the Trader Support Service, which is used for freight movements, and there's a different treatment for goods moving under fast parcel operators, and I think it's very important that we cover that, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to. But under the TSS system, a company here in Northern Ireland, they place an order with their supplier in Great Britain, and depending on the Incoterms, i.e. who's responsible for organising the movement of those goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, either the supplier, if it's delivered at place, or if it's Ex Works, the customer here in Northern Ireland organises a haulier, contacts a haulier to collect these goods. As it stands, as it stood up until last month, as part of the safety and security declaration, you provide information on the movement, the consignor, the consignee, the exporter, the importer. There's no export declarations on GB to NI movements. You provide details on the vehicle registration, the trailer details. You provide details on the sailing route that's been taken, the date of movement, and you provide a description of the goods. Now, in real terms, that description of the goods must be sufficient for a customs agent to be able to physically identify the goods at the point of movement. For example, if I am moving boxes of polo shirts, the description could be Fruit of the Loom, polo shirts, boxes of 200, multiple sizes and colours. The reality is the description that was being provided would be something as generic as clothes. So that's what was happening. And this is, I think, one of the things that the EU have picked up on. The TSS process, when the safety and security declaration is completed by the haulier, that auto generates a simplified frontier declaration, which is the start of the declaration process. For an IMI record moving on to the simplified process for internal market movements, it can be done pre-movement, and there's a requirement then that you need to provide commodity code, country of origin, item value. This information requires the supplier or the haulier sharing it with the supplier or the customer, the importer in Northern Ireland, to share this information with the haulier. Under ICS2, you require both, or you need the commodity code, you need the country of origin, and you need the description of the goods. So instead of just having a requirement for description as it was previously, you now require this. Now, there has been a request made by the UK, and I think about a dozen other countries in the EU for a bit of time to get this new ICS2 system and processes in place, and that is before requested to have it kind of postponed, pushed back until January 2026. But I do know that TSS have rolled out the system for some groupage type movement. So what are the implications for hauliers? Implications for hauliers is they require more information, so there's more time, administrative requirements on them. And the implications for both suppliers in GB and their customers here in Northern Ireland is that they need to ensure that they're providing the information to their hauliers to allow them to make those movements happen. Now, does ICS2 negate, or does it remove the benefits that we have from the Windsor Framework in terms of the simplifications and processes and so forth? Because an ENS is required for both not risk and not at risk movement. If you work on the basis that you require under an internal market movement information record a 6-digit or an 8-digit commodity code, depending on if it's a standard good 6-digit commodity code, 8-digit for a category 2 good, a category 1 good, or goods for trade remedies that cannot move under the simplified process for internal market movement. And you also require the country of origin for the goods so that you check if they are in that trade remedies category, and the item value. That information is required anyway, so you could argue that it's required in both cases. And that allows me to segue very quickly into the fast parcel operator element of it, because this has come out in the number of questions that we've had today, Peter. I mentioned earlier that when we have freight movements have been coming in under these arrangements from the 1st of January 2021. And under the Windsor Framework, Northern Ireland Protocol arrangements, we have been able to use the Trader Support Service to complete our declarations. And we're using what was originally known as Custom Freight Simplified Procedures. And this is where we were providing the vast majority of the information post-movement, i.e. there's a simplified frontier declaration generated through the ENS, the Safety and Security Declaration. And then it used to be the 4th working day of the following month, it's now the 10th day of the following month. The importer of record or their agents must go in and complete the declaration, providing information on the commodity code, the country of origin, any additional dock codes, any additional requirements that they have. Fast parcel operators are not using TSS, as far as I know. They're using their own external systems. They're using, in the most part, entry into declarant's record, where they hold these records. They don't necessarily provide those records to HMRC. But that has removed our ability to complete declarations post-movement. So the fast parcel operator requires from the supplier or the customer here in Northern Ireland, whoever is organising the fast parcel movement, a commodity code. If it's a UKIMS movement, internal market movement information movement, they need a 6-digit or 8-digit commodity code. They need the country of origin. They need the item weights. If it is moving under UKIMS, that should mean that the goods come into you and there is no duty charges applied, but that information must be provided. If your parcels are at risk, and the same criteria, eligibility criteria applies for both parcel movements from GB to NI as does for freight movements, i.e. pallets, half loads, quarter loads, full loads, moving into Northern Ireland. You must still meet the eligibility criteria. I've heard some individuals tell me that their fast parcel operator or supplier in GB has said, we will not move goods unless your UKIM's authorised. That is not correct. You can still move goods at risk of entering the EU outside of UKIM's. I am extremely frustrated at the moment, as I know a number of individuals who have put questions in here around the ability at the moment to waive those tariffs when the goods come in by a fast parcel operator, and indeed to use return goods relief and preferential origin. We believe that fast parcel operators give understanding, give a commitment to the UK government prior to the implementation on the 1st of May 2025, that where goods were at risk of entering the European Union, where companies could not declare the goods as not at risk, they could use their waiver to waive these associated charges, or they could use preferential origin if the goods were UK origin, or indeed return goods relief if the goods previously been in free circulation in the EU prior to movement to GB and onward to NI with evidence requirements. We do not believe that if they are providing this, it has been widely publicised or is widely known. And as a result, companies are being hit with duty charges, often many weeks, months after the movement has taken place, and associated disbursement fees. Those disbursement fees are the charges applied by the fast parcel operator for paying duty on behalf of the company. Those disbursement fees are not reclaimable under the duty reimbursement scheme. It is only the duty. So if you're hit with £4 of duty, for example, but you've been hit with a £16 duty reimbursement fee, or sorry, a duty disbursement fee, you can claim back the £4, you can't claim back the 16. So we're working hard and working with the UK government. I'm very independent. I'm not associated with the UK government. I'm not part of the UK government. I didn't negotiate these arrangements. I'm just trying to ensure that we're compliant to these arrangements, to ensure that these facilities and schemes are available to companies. So I know people are asking, why am I getting hit with charges from fast parcel operators for goods coming in? And those charges will be duty applied because the goods have been declared as at risk, and there will be associated disbursement and administration fees. And we are saying to fast parcel operators, to suppliers in Great Britain, and to companies here in Northern Ireland organising those fast parcel movements, you must ensure, put it in writing, request that the goods are moved, they're at risk, when they are at risk, and that you wish to use your de minimis waiver, your waiver allowance, i.e. NIAID, provide them with your EORI number that will be linked to your waiver allowance, or if the goods are UK preferential origin, that you have provided the evidence, and ensure that they know. I don't believe it necessarily is being dealt with properly at the moment. I know it isn't, but hopefully in time we will get this sorted, because it is definitely an issue for many companies at the moment receiving parcel movements. I've got clients who only receive parts through parcel movements, so they were never required to sign up for TSS because they never had any freight movements. They never in fact had to worry about de minimis allowances. They never had to worry about EORI numbers and things like that, because up until the 1st of May this year, there was no customs on fast parcel movements from GB to NI due to a grace period agreed at the beginning, then a unilaterally extended grace period, and then the Windsor Framework, which gave us 18 months, which was eventually extended to 24 months for the implementation of these arrangements. A lot to take in, but it is something that we're actively working to address with both the UK government and with fast parcel operators. So we started talking about ENS and ICS, Peter, apologies, and then I went on to the other thing, but it is very important in all these movements that there's a requirement to provide commodity codes, country of origin, and item values. And it is very difficult getting this from a GB supplier. So especially when a GB supplier believes that this is an extremely complicated process. The reality is movements from Great Britain to Northern Ireland should never be, and in my opinion, are not as complicated as goods moving from GB into the EU or EU into GB. There is no export declarations requirements. We have access for freight movements through Trader Support Service. We have duty reimbursement schemes. We have duty waiver schemes. We've got all of these schemes that are available. But you cannot complete a customs declaration without this essential information, i.e. commodity codes, country of origin, item values. And the same is the case for ICS too. You will need this information. Your haulier will need this information.
Justin, we're sort of on the subject of fast parcel movements, and I know there's a couple of questions came in through the chat function. So how can duty be reclaimed if it was charged in error by the fast parcel operator? Sorry.
So this was coming up for EU NI or EU GB movements prior to the introduction of customs requirements for GB NI movements. And I know from previous experience where duty was charged incorrectly or VAT was charged incorrectly, you went back, for those EU, UK, as in GB movements, or vice versa. You went back to the fast parcel operator who made the charge, who you paid the charge to, and you claimed it back. And I know that the same fast parcel operators are operating in both these markets. And I was involved in those claims, and we were able to get the overcharge back. Now, we do also have, obviously, the duty reimbursement scheme, and we have, as I mentioned earlier on, the I'm going to say it wrong again, the C285 form for overpayment of duty, and you need to provide evidence. But it is getting the fast parcel operators to understand the obligations. I genuinely believe that in many cases we have tried to fit a round hole with a square peg, and we're trying to just kind of add to the GB and I movements systems that are working for GB EU movements and vice versa, without taking into consideration the difference that is in place with regards to schemes like UK Internal Market scheme, and for our waiver and ability to use waiver schemes. I am hoping that at some point we will get fast parcel operators to accept that what they're doing at the moment is not the right way. I am very vocal around this in my own capacity to try and get that across. I believe that it's a bigger problem than many of us think at the moment, because I'd say there's many accounts department who have not really thought about it. They're getting invoices from each one of these separate fast parcel operators. We know who they all are, and they're just paying them, and they're not actually putting it up the chain. They're not escalating these things. Or what we hear as well is movements have come in May, June, July, but invoices are only now being received from companies. And the concern is how the duty has been calculated. The concern is around the fees that are being charged, but we can only keep highlighting this, we can only keep flagging it, and make this aware, and keep records where you've been charged duty. I appreciate companies are saying that they're being put on stop. They have been sent to debt recovery agencies, and they have to pay this, they have no choice to pay it, and they're finding that a large part of what they're paying is administrative and disbursement fees. But it is something that we absolutely need to get addressed, Peter. We're not going to address it here, but it is something that I'm very active about and active on externally, within my own day-to-day world.
Yeah. Could you just maybe, again, staying with fast parcel operators, just reiterate maybe how they use the tariff waiver scheme for fast parcel movements?
So, in an ideal world, a company should, so in the vast majority of fast parcel movements, it is the supplier in Great Britain that is organising the parcel movement, rather than the importer of record, i.e. the customer here in Northern Ireland. So we've got terms like consignor, consignee, we've got exporter and importer. For GBNI movements, there is no export declaration requirements. There is no export safety and security declaration requirement in GB, but there is an import declaration requirement in Northern Ireland, and there is an import safety and security declaration, or from the 1st of January, and in some cases from now, an ICS2 requirement. That means that information is required for the movement of goods, irrespective if they're at risk or not at risk, such as commodity codes, country of origin, and so forth. Where the fast parcel operator is being instructed by the supplier, my advice is the company here in Northern Ireland to write to pick up the phone to engage with their suppliers, get a list of their suppliers in Great Britain, put in writing to them that their goods are at risk of entering the European Union and that they wish to use their de minimis allowance, i.e. the €300,000 allowance over a rolling 36 period, to waive the associated tariffs. Provide their EORI number within this letter. Highlight that this instruction should go to the fast parcel operator, that the goods are at risk, but tariffs can be dealt with using NIAID and using the waiver. Will that automatically be applied? Unfortunately, I cannot say yes, but at least you've made efforts to get it done, and you can hold that evidence thereafter. But the alternative is your goods will, if you do not provide them with a UKIMS authorization, your goods will automatically be deemed to be at risk of entering the EU. And the most likely scenario is that the fast parcel operator will apply duty and charge you disbursement fees, despite the fact that you are not the customer of the fast parcel operator, despite the fact that you have not or may not have been asked at any point to complete a written mandate where the fast parcel operator has indicated that they are acting as a direct customs representative for you. But put it in writing, pick the phone up to your suppliers, explain the predicament that you're in, explain to them that this information is required, and you know, commodity codes, country of origin, and so forth. And then, you know, try and get that instruction to the fast parcel operators. And you may find that some operate better than others, and then it is working with your supplier to ensure that that is the fast parcel operator you try and use going forward.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time. We have 15 minutes left, and we still have a fair number of questions to try and get through. But I mean, we've heard in the news from time to time there are those suppliers in GB that are simply just stopping selling goods into Northern Ireland. Any advice for how that could be not necessarily worked around, but is there anything that companies here can do to persuade or take some of the administrative burden off their GB suppliers to allow them to continue to supplying?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And, you know, again, I'm stressing that whilst I am very positive about our dual market access here in Northern Ireland, and I am supportive of the Windsor Framework arrangements, it does not in any way diminish my acknowledgement that there is huge challenges for businesses, both here in Northern Ireland and indeed within their supply chain within Great Britain. Around this time last year, the Secretary of State announced a new body called Intertrade UK, which is set up to support trade within the United Kingdom internally and trade between GB and NI, and I fully support those efforts, because I believe one of the biggest issues that we have is lack of understanding, clarity, and guidance, especially in Great Britain when it comes to supplying to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, in my honest opinion, provides an opportunity for partnership and, you know, as a bridge into the EU market for GB companies wishing to dip their toes again. And that provides opportunities for Northern Ireland PLC and the companies here within Northern Ireland. So if a company in Great Britain is under the impression that it is too complicated to supply to Northern Ireland. You know what? In my old jobs, in my old roles, when I worked in industry, we would have often hopped on a plane and went over, or a boat and went over to Great Britain and met with our suppliers there. And we try and get across the opportunities that exist in partnering with Northern Ireland. And those opportunities are strengthened now under our dual market access, general product safety regulations, the ability that we have to be authorised representatives for companies and so forth. The first port of call for information such as commodity codes and country of origin should always be your supplier, and hopefully they can provide that information. But be aware that the importer of record is always responsible for ensuring that that information is correct. Now, if you cannot get that information from your supplier in GB, or indeed if you're looking at markets elsewhere and you've got a supply chain that is global, you have the ability to get, here in Northern Ireland, we require what's known as a BTI, a binding tariff identification. This is where you request to HMRC their classification, tariff classification service for a BTI, and you set out why you believe a certain commodity code is correct for the products that you bring in. Best of my knowledge from past dealings with it, applying for BTI is free. The only time there will be charges is if there is any testing or requirements or so forth on products. So that will help you. You have the ability, essentially, Peter, to purchase on an ex works basis, i.e. you can say to your customer in Great Britain, we will take full responsibility for the products. You sell it to us. You charge us UK VAT just the same way as because it's an internal sale within the UK, because we have there's precedent where we can use that for the VAT requirements. And we will then take control from your doors, your gate of your warehouse or your factory, and take those goods into Northern Ireland. That means that we will be responsible for organising the haulier or the fast parcel operator and providing them with the commodity code, the country of origin of the goods, and the value of the goods. And that removes any risk to the GB supplier, but you still require that information. Once you have the goods then here in Northern Ireland, if you've declared them at risk of entering the European Union, you have the ability then to sell those products in both markets. Be aware of the other obligations, such as under general product safety regulations. We have new regulations, legislation coming in, such as EUDR. CBAM is for carbon intensive products. I know there's questions on that, Peter, and I'm going to try and cover that very quickly. The official line around the introduction of CBAM in Northern Ireland. Imports into Northern Ireland are not subject to the requirements of the EU CBAM regulations. EU CBAM provisions are not applicable in NI unless and until the measures are incorporated in the Windsor Framework. CBAM is not currently included in the Windsor Framework, which would need to be specifically agreed by the UK and the EU at joint committee level. UK intend to implement their own CBAM legislation in January 27, and that is expected to cover imports into the UK and will apply across the UK. So the type of products that or industries that CBAM impacts or carbon intensive goods, cement, steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, hydrogen, and so forth. The best case scenario when it is implemented in, or if it is implemented in Northern Ireland, is that, as was announced on the 19th of May this year, the UK and EU plan to link their emissions trading systems, ETS, with a shared intent to establish a mutual CBAM exemption which means goods covered by one jurisdiction would be exempt from the other. And this has been pushed by both major energy firms and industry groups. But the bottom line is that there's two timelines for CBAM. CBAM is due to come in fully implemented in the EU from the 1st of January 26. The UK's CBAM is not meant to come in until 1st of January 2027. But it is currently under the basis that it is not covered in Windsor Framework, but would need to be specifically agreed by both the UK and the EU, and obviously the storm and break could come into play thereafter if there was implications. So in a roundabout way, if the company in GB feels that it's too complicated to move goods into Northern Ireland, you can remove that complication by taking it on. You then still have to get commodity codes, country of origin information, and item values, but you have the ability to reach out to HMRC and get a BTI to help you with the classification process, or to ensure that you've got a classification that won't be challenged for a set period of time. You know that if you bring in goods from outside the EU, which includes Great Britain, depending on if it's consumer goods, you have to meet registration requirements or legislation requirements such as general product safety regulations. EUDR is expected to be brought in, soft touch CBAM. I've just highlighted what we have there, but you have the ability to be that conduit, that bridge between Great Britain and the EU, and to profit from that as being, availing of Northern Ireland's unique trading arrangements and dual market access.
Okay, again, just for clarity, just CBAM for anybody that doesn't know, that's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And also Jonathan referred there to, I suppose, what we know now as the UK-EU reset in May of this year. And I mean, there's still a lot to be negotiated around that, but it does have the potential to ease some of the issues with the movement of goods from GB to Northern Ireland, in particular agri-food goods, if they can both reach an SPS agreement and that. But that is still very much a work in progress at the minute, and we probably won't see any progress on it until really 2027 at the earliest. Just moving quickly on then, question on the use of EU FTAs for exports. Can businesses here use them? I suppose I could answer that one. As part of the agreement, Northern Ireland remains in the UK customs territory, so therefore goods in terms of exports are deemed to be of UK origin, subject to meeting requirements within those FTAs, but you can only use UK FTAs for export for goods from Northern Ireland, so you can't use EU FTAs for exporting goods. Is it correct that Northern Ireland have an EU VAT code for EU reporting?
So we have an XI VAT registration number. We have to meet EC sales list requirements for our sales and purchases into and from the EU. There's no threshold. I know that companies often get mixed up with Intrastat and EC sales list. There's no registration threshold. There's no $250,000 or $1 million, depending on imports or exports element, which applies with Intrastat, which is statistical recording records. So if we go into VIES, so if we are purchasing from a supplier in Ireland or elsewhere in the European Union, they will ask us for our VAT registration number. We provide them with our XI VAT registration number. If you go into the VIES system, it will show that our VAT registration is authorised and can be used, and therefore it can be treated as an intra-community supply. Equally, if we have a customer within Ireland or elsewhere in the EU, and they provide us with their VAT registration number, we must check on the VIES system that their VAT registration allows them, is approved for intra-community, i.e. EU supplies. Ireland, for example, has both domestic and inter-community. So just because a company in Ireland provides you with their IE VAT registration number, it does not mean that they are approved, authorised for intra-community supply, and that will come back to impact you if HMRC do a VAT audit and you have not charged UK VAT and they're looking for evidence, and your customer in Ireland was only approved for domestic VAT purposes, i.e. Purchases and sales within Ireland itself, the 26 counties, they must be approved for intra-community supply. Not every country, not every member state has this two-part VAT registration requirement, but some do, including Ireland. So yes, we have an XI VAT registration number. If you were involved in the trade of goods, if you had a BT postcode, you should have automatically been provided with an XI VAT registration number back around 2021, the start of 2021. Again, because I'm a company who's involved in services, I wasn't automatically provided with an XI VAT registration number, but I applied for one and I could get one through Government Gateway, which allows me to purchase goods from goods, emphasis is on goods, not services, purchase goods from suppliers in Ireland and elsewhere in the EU, provide them with my XI VAT registration number. They did not charge me Irish VAT, and then I accounted for it on my VAT return, and therefore I became both the supplier and the customer, and I was able to include that because it was fully for business purposes on my VAT return.
Okay, John, could you maybe say a quick word on the future of the Trader Support Service?
In terms of, we know that in terms of where we are, even. Yeah, so in terms of the Trader Support Service, our understanding is that it is out. Well, we know that it's out for competitive tendering at the moment. We know that there's several consortiums tendering for that, including the current consortium that operate Trader Support Service. Depending on who is successful in that, we will either have, going forward the same system as we have today, or which is a work in progress and it's been upgraded and tweaked at all times, as is UKIM's application. By the way, it has become a lot more streamlined than it was when it first came out in June 2023. But if it goes to a different consortium, we don't know yet if it will be the same process where we complete supplementary declarations thereafter, or if it will be similar to fast parcel movements where declarations must be completed up front before movement takes place. So it's up in the air. I understand it's something we should know more at the end of October, and with maybe coming into play and being implemented at the start of next year. What the UK government have given assurances about, and this was a concern of mine and others, when we had UKIMs, which effectively meant that we removed the requirement to complete import declarations, and we completed instead internal market movement information records for not at risk goods, that the service that had been put in place for at risk and not at risk movement may be lost, because obviously there's a cost for the UK government within the TSS, because it allows us to be customs agents and self-declare our goods by completing these declarations that had to be completed by yesterday, today for August movements. But they've given assurances that there will be a service continue to be available, and that will be by whoever is successful in this tender process.
Thank you. I mean, I'm conscious our time is up, but I'm maybe going to try and squeeze in just one or two more questions to try and close off as many of them as possible. So this is sort of probably a summary of the whole thing, but how does it work if a Northern Ireland company imports raw materials from ROI, GB, the EU, then manufactures those goods, and then the goods go to either GB, ROI, or rest of world. So that's a sort of all-encompassing. But just try and summarise all the issues.
It's a great question, Peter, and that gives us an opportunity to kind of showcase our dual market access. So, you know, when we bring in from EU, rest of world, Great Britain, raw materials, component parts, and we are a commercial processor here in Northern Ireland, and we then want to sell into the EU, the UK market, internal market that we are an integral part of, or the rest of the world. Those goods are, we are obviously declaring those component parts that are coming in from both rest of the world to Northern Ireland directly, or from GB as at risk. And when we're bringing them in from the EU, there is no customs requirements because of Articles 30 and 110 of the Treaty for the Function of the European Union. We then manufacture the product here in Northern Ireland. So that means that the materials that we are bringing in transform into a different new product. And therefore, we would expect that they will meet both non-preferential origin and preferential origin requirements under UK free trade agreements. And in terms of the US, as it stands today, it is essentially a memorandum of understanding. It is the basis of a trade agreement. So we are dealing with non-preferential origin. And I would usually refer to my colleague, Dr. Anna Drzewska, at this point when I'm talking about things like that. But it would be under that non-preferential origin. It has undergone transformation, and significant transformation, and then it would be sold. It can be sold as a UK origin product. So in terms of sales into the UK, it will be a qualified Northern Ireland good. Sales into the EU, we have full access. We don't have to meet any rules of origin requirements, such as non-preferential or preferential origin. We have no customs requirements. And when we sell it into the rest of the world, we avail of and benefit from UK free trade agreements. That at-risk element comes up very often, Peter, and it's just an opportunity to summarise it again. And that's where the biggest confusion lies. People assume that because they bring in materials and turn those materials into something else, i.e. they don't sell the materials that they bring in, that they are not at risk. As I pointed out in Article 4, they were automatically at risk under the Northern Ireland Protocol, and now we have those exemptions as commercial processors. There's a turnover threshold of 2 million. You must also meet the standard eligibility criteria for UKIMs. You must also hold evidence for 5 years, or you could be in one of those at risk or approved purposes, which is construction, permanent structure in Northern Ireland, not permanent structure in the United Kingdom, permanent structure in Northern Ireland. Permanent structure in Ireland is at risk for that, just in that definition, because I know there's another question. But this is our dual market access, and then we benefit from UK FTAs as well. I know there's a question, Peter, about FTAs. It's in front of me here about if goods have moved in to Great Britain under a free trade agreement, UK free trade agreement, and then it moves into NI. Does it lose? Does it mean that the FTA does not count and duty would be payable? It's a very good question. It has been customs cleared in the United Kingdom under a UK free trade agreement. If it is at risk of entry in the EU when it comes into Northern Ireland, it has EU tariffs applied to it, and applicable EU tariffs applied. But if it is not at risk of entry in the EU, no further tariffs will apply because it's already NIDOM, as in it is been released into free circulation in the UK GB.
Okay, I think, Jonathan, that's probably as good a place as any to leave it. So thank you, everybody, for joining. You can get further information on the nibusinessinfo.co.uk website and all the subject areas that were covered today. You can also get more specific information on dual market access on our own InvestNI website at investni.com/dual market access. And just remains for me to say thank you again for joining, and thank you to Jonathan for giving the time up today and also for answering all those questions. Thank you, everybody.